Hello, my name is Joshua Calloway and I'm Technical Project Manager for QuickLearn. QuickLearn is the world leader in .NET, SharePoint, and BizTalk server training and consulting. Our instructors have taught more developers and administrators how to successfully build and manage BizTalk enterprise solutions than any other company in the world. We offer public and private training and mentoring solutions worldwide. For more information about our courses and to view additional tutorials, please visit quicklearn.com.
In this demonstration, you will see how to bind InfoPath controls to data contained in a SharePoint library. Binding data is an effective way to centralize InfoPath form data within SharePoint, so it can be easily managed and changed without requiring the republication and redistribution of individual InfoPath forms. Let's start by looking at the form fields we'll be binding to SharePoint data. This is a sample travel request form that contains all the information required to make travel arrangements for QuickLearn employees. As you can see, the form contains preference fields for hotel, airline, and car rental. Up to this point, when a user requests the purchase of airline travel, it was up to the user to type information into these text boxes, indicating their specific seating preferences. There's also the option of using the meal preference text box to designate which type of meal you prefer on any given airline. What we'll be doing in this demonstration is binding these fields to data contained in a SharePoint list so that the information is consistent from user to user and can be easily updated and managed in SharePoint rather than in the form itself. Now let's take a look at the SharePoint lists to which we'll be binding the InfoPath form. Here you can see the Seating Preferences SharePoint list. This list contains data for the available seating options on most airlines: window seat, aisle seat, exit row window, and exit row aisle. You can see we have a column that shows the entire display name of the selection. We also have an abbreviation column, which is a maximum of 6 characters long, and makes the data more efficient for storage in an XML document. In addition to seating preference, we have a meal preference list. This list shows the available meal types on most airlines. Now that we've examined the form and the SharePoint lists, let's go ahead and bind the data. Presently, the form uses text boxes as input, but in order to bind to existing data, we'll need to choose a different control type. In this case, a drop-down list box works best. For this demonstration, we'll be looking up the available fields from the Travel Preference SharePoint list. For this demonstration, we will be looking up values from an external data source, specifically the Travel Preference SharePoint list. Next, we must add the SharePoint list as a data source. The wizard is pretty much self-explanatory. Here, we'll create a new connection that will receive data from the SharePoint list or library. We'll set the address of our SharePoint site. And then we must select the list from which we want to pull the data. In this case, we'll go ahead and select the Seating Preference list. Now we must choose the list columns we actually want to use within the form. As you recall, the Travel Preference list had 2 columns of interest: the display name column and the abbreviation column. We'll use the display name column as the data that's displayed in the form itself when it's opened, and we'll use the abbreviation column in the form XML for processing purposes, so we want to select both of these. Next, we are given the option to store a copy of the data in the form template. In this demonstration, the whole purpose of binding the form to SharePoint data is to keep the form dynamic. If we choose to store a copy of the list data in the form template, we make the form static, so changing the data on SharePoint doesn't affect the form itself. So we'll leave this checkbox clear. We can leave the default name for the data connection, and we'll go ahead and click Finish to complete the wizard. Back in the drop-down list box properties, you can see the seating preference data source has now been added to the drop-down list. Next, we must specify which entries to use. In this case, we want to use both entries, so we'll select seating preference. And then we'll use these entries to define the value and display name. Obviously, we want our display name to stay display name. However, we want the value stored in the form as abbreviation. We've now finished modifying our seating preference control. We'll just go ahead and resize the box so it fits a little bit better. And now we're ready to configure our meal preference control. We'll follow pretty much the exact same steps to change the meal preference control. You'll see that we have the seating preference list in the data source list. However, we want to be sure to use the meal preference list. And of course, the only field we're interested in is the meal type. We'll use only a single entry, which will be the meal type. And because we're using only a single entry, there's no need to set its values. Again, we'll resize the control so it fits a little better on the form. And now that we've created our data binding, let's preview the form and take a look at the data we've bound to. You can see our travel preference section now uses a drop-down list, and we're given the option of window seat, aisle seat, exit row window, and exit row aisle. We're also given the meal preference drop-down list, kosher, vegetarian, and no preference. Now, we can see here that our meal option does not include halal, which is a popular preference on most airlines today. Let's go ahead and close the form and modify the SharePoint list to include halal meals. Back in our meal preference library, I'll simply add a new item to the list. And now that halal has been added to the meal preference list, we'll return to the form and preview again. We can see that the change we made to the SharePoint list has dynamically affected the InfoPath form. In this demonstration, you saw how to bind SharePoint list data to an InfoPath form, enabling dynamic management of InfoPath control data without requiring republication of InfoPath forms.